I'm here with Jared Spataro, Corporate Vice President of Modern Work at Microsoft. Jared will be one of our keynote speakers at the I4CP 2022 Next Practices Now conference in March, presenting alongside Don Klinghoffer, Microsoft's head of people analytics, on what the data says about achieving work-life balance in the hybrid world. Jared also oversees Microsoft's Work Trend Index, and the latest data release is all about frontline workers. The first key finding is that a culture of caring is the new currency on the front line. So Jared, what does that look like in reality, and what's your recommendation to organizations with large frontline populations?
Well, the first thing I think is taking a step back just to get a sense for what this frontline population is all about. They're a tremendous part of the worldwide workforce. They're over 80%, in fact, of the global workforce. 88% of organizations worldwide employ frontline workers. When you add them all up, there are more than 2 billion people who are right at the front line, serving customers, creating products. So it's an incredibly important segment of the working population, and one that we feel like at Microsoft has been underserved and understudied. You are right that this idea of a culture of caring really popped for us, and I'll just share a couple of stats that really caught my attention. As you think about what's happened in the front line over the last 2 years, 66% of frontline workers say now that they are more bonded to their colleagues than they were before the pandemic, just simply because of the hardships of the pandemic. So we're definitely seeing that idea that you rally together to meet a challenge. But at the same time, roughly about 60% of the same base, that same survey base, says that leadership doesn't prioritize, or they don't feel like leadership prioritizes workplace culture, and that they're just not getting messages from the top. Those leadership messages aren't making it to them. We also asked them to kind of project out into the future. Where's this all going? 58% was the global average, said that they felt like the situation on the front line was going to stay as bad as it is now or even get worse. So there's this feeling of like, do people know that I'm hearing the stress that I'm feeling right now? What this really tells us is that messages from leadership aren't getting down in the way they need to, that communication isn't happening in the way that it needs to, and that there's an opportunity, we see it as, to really take how an organization feels about its frontline workforce, because as I talk to leaders, they recognize how important it is to do more. So we kind of recommend that organizations, based on these findings, do 3 things. First, prioritize this important group. Make sure you're opening lines of communication with them and really making sure that you're expressing how you feel about what they contribute to the organization. Second, we see an awesome opportunity with technology. I'm a little biased, obviously, coming from Microsoft, but the survey does indicate that 63% of these folks said that technology would make a difference. In fact, in a list of things that would reduce stress, technology was number 3 behind pay and paid time off. So that's a pretty good position to be in. And the last thing that we'd say is don't forget training. It's not just that you can give people technology, you have to get them ready to use it, make sure they know how to use it. So it's a very interesting time in the world, certainly a very interesting time for businesses as they think about the opportunities and the challenges with their frontline workers.
Mm-hmm. So a culture of caring sounds a little bit different than a culture built around purpose. Where do those concepts differ and where do they overlap?
Well, as I work with my team, if I just zoom in for a moment, what I feel like I found over the years is at the end of the day, when you're really trying to create an environment that gets someone excited about working, it's all about that person. It literally is all about them. So I don't think that there's so much difference between purpose and caring. What we're really trying to express to someone and have them feel is that the work they do is important, that they're contributing not only to the organization, but the world in a way that really aligns with what they care about in their lives. So I think both those things are actually, tied together. If you look again at the stats for a moment, 51% of the people who answered our frontline worker survey said that they did not feel valued by their company. I think it's useful to just stop and put a period behind that. Like, that's a lot, that means just over half of the people we surveyed said, I don't know if anybody thinks that this work is very valuable. Now, that stat isn't telling us that the work isn't valuable. That stat's telling us that they aren't hearing that they are valued. And there's a big difference there. When I talk to leaders, I think leaders are very clear that in many cases, frontline workers are what makes their world go round. Without great frontline service, they just don't have a business. And so there is this gap here where the culture of caring can help people to find their purpose or to connect with the greater purpose that the company represents. So I think if you understand a little bit of the dynamics right now, you can see that those 2 things really aren't at odds.
Yeah, well said, well said. So over the last 2 years, and as companies look to the future, we've heard from many HR leaders about their concerns of having a culture of haves and have-nots, employees who are able to work remotely, more flexibly, and those who have to be on site and maybe have less flexible schedules. Where do you see that happy medium, and how do companies get there?
The media loves tension. They inject lots of tension into stories, and this idea of have and have-nots is, I think, a dimension of tension that's easy to pick up on, easy to report on. In reality, life is a bit more complex, more sophisticated than that. Lots of people who do frontline jobs do them because they choose them, because they don't want to have the same type of work that maybe someone who goes in and sits at a desk does. And so what we see is that you really have to look at each role and each situation. At the end of the day, I think it gets down to whether or not people feel like they're valued by the organization that they're working for, and whether or not they feel like they're doing work that contributes. When we feel like we're contributing, again, to an organization or to the world, I think it does wonders, for how we feel. And so instead of trying to kind of paint with a broad brushstroke of have and have nots, it's better to get down to that level. When you do get down to that level, what you find is that you can make a big difference, particularly, again, I'm biased, but with technology and getting technology into the hands of people so that they're more empowered in their jobs. An information worker, as an example, has benefited tremendously from video conferencing. It's allowed them to be home and continue to do their work. But again, when we go down and talk to these frontline workers, what we're finding is they're not asking to go home to do their jobs. They're just simply saying, wow, curbside pickup, a new way of serving customers. Like, I need the tools to be able to serve these customers well and feel like I'm doing a good job. So our recommendation here isn't to try and look at it in those very stark have and have not terms, but instead to just look at the technology and what we can do to enable people to do their jobs well.
That's great. Great recommendation. So at Microsoft, you obviously sit on a wealth of data that is helping inform decisions regarding what works and what doesn't when it comes to hybrid work. That's what my final question, as businesses do look to return to office in some way or form, what's your recommendation to leaders who are trying to figure out what to do? That's a broad question, I
It
realize.
is. Well, but here's what I'd say. Nobody has this figured out. If you are listening to someone who has some three-step formula and this is the way to go do hybrid work, the only thing I can tell you about that is that they don't know what they're talking about. No, none of us do. What we're really trying to do is to be guided by data and not dogma. My recommendation to myself and to everybody else out there who is any type of business leader is to really zoom in on flexibility and really kind of bring a growth mindset to this situation. We're going to have to learn. We're going to have to try some things to see how they work, to adapt, then to try some more things and adapt again. This is one of those situations where we are making it up as we go. I think the most successful organizations are going to be those that bring a growth mindset and the tools so that they have feedback loops, so they understand what's working and what's not, and they can pivot, adapt, and change as the dynamics change. We're talking about a labor market that's in flux. We're talking about economies that are in flux, and we're talking about health circumstances that continue to change literally week by week. So none of us have it figured out, but if we use the data and kind of some good common sense, I think it'll make a big difference.
Yeah, well, that speaks right to I4CP's mission and purpose. So yeah, common sense combined with data. So I love it. And Jared, I look forward to meeting you in person and hearing more about this and work-life balance at the I4CP conference. So thank you so much for spending a few minutes with me today.
You bet. Likewise. Looking forward to it.